Hello, welcome back to my channel, Hasty Books. I'm Camila, and today I'm bringing you a little check-in on how my non-fiction November and NaNoWriMo are doing. So in terms of books that I've been reading and also the kind of writing I've been doing as well. So let's dive right in. I've read 5 books in the first half of the month, well, almost halfway through the month. Actually, I'm going to the office the next few days, so I won't be able to film. So I'm filming now, and yeah, up to now I've finished 5, but I'm probably going to finish 1 book later tonight. So technically probably 6 books in the first half of the month. So I'm quite pleased with that. The first one was Taste by Stanley Tucci. I really enjoyed this. This was the audiobook read by Tucci himself. And I thought it was just it was well written. It was actually so funny. There's lines where I just burst out laughing because I just thought it was just, yeah, his kind of almost sometimes insults, but they were really funny because they were about, like, let's say putting some certain meat and like Italian pasta and stuff like that. Like, it was just really funny, and I really enjoyed learning about his life growing up, his heritage, his family. Obviously did not know that he'd lost his wife to cancer, that he got cancer himself as well, and it felt kind of really relevant because obviously I think it must have come out recently because it sort of ends while the pandemic is happening, so obviously very current. And I always kind of liked him as an actor, you know, like I feel like there was some good roles, and very, I don't know, he seems really personable, except for The Lovely Bones, which I've just rejected the idea of even watching that. But otherwise, yeah, I thought that this book made him even more personable because I think he seems like a just really kind of nice and down-to-earth person, and I really enjoyed that. And there were so many recipes as well in this book that was really cool, and also I was just like salivating listening to him describe these ingredients and these recipes, and there's definitely a couple that I want to try. So I'd seen a really good review of Taste on from Nix Reads booktube channel, and I have to completely echo her review saying that this is really good, like a big recommend, especially if you like food, if you like Tucci, you know, why not try this book. Then I listened to another audiobook called Girls on Film, Lessons from a Life of Watching Women on Film by Alicia Malone. So I did not know anything about this book or Alicia Malone when I picked it up. It's just that it's a subject that interests me, and I saw it on my library app, and I was like, yeah, I'll just listen to it. I did not realize that she was, I guess, a movie or entertainment reviewer slash TV personality, and I did not realize that she was Australian. So obviously this talks about, it starts when she's quite young, and it kind of goes over her growing up and watching movies and what she learned from them and how obsessive she was with movies. I did not expect it to be almost like a memoir, so I did not enjoy that aspect that much because I don't know Malone. So I was just like, you know, I like to pick memoirs by people that I'm kind of interested in, like learning about their life. So this felt a bit like jarring because I was like, oh, I thought I'd listen more about the girl on film and less about herself. And also because she's Australian, there's a lot of popular culture I thought from Australia that I just didn't get, so I didn't connect with that or relate with it as much. That said, if you know Alicia Malone and you kind of enjoy her reviews or like her personality, you might enjoy this. But it has some really good commentary on, I guess, women in film, but also actresses and producers, and like just being a woman in the kind of industry. So I thought that that was really good. Then I read Feminist City by Leslie Kern. This is supposed to be I guess like a guide. Yeah, it's like women reclaim the city. And this book was not what I expected, basically. So it was really good. I think I gave it 3 stars because I think it was, I think I gave it 4. It's like a 3.5 in my mind because it was good. But I expected it a bit more scientific and like based on facts. And a lot of this was based, I want to say, on Kern's own experience. So she talks a lot about her own lived experience in cities and kind of what that means for women generally. And she backed that up a little bit, but I did feel like a little bit too pulled into her own kind of viewpoint. That said, I think it has a good basis if you want to learn a little bit about urban development. I won't go further into this. I don't know if this is a book I would totally recommend. Maybe it's because I had really high expectations, but this disappointed me a little bit. It's quite short at least, so it was a quick read. That said, I followed it up with Invisible Women Exposing Data Bias in a World Designed for Men by Criado Perez. And potentially that's also the issue I had with Feminist City, is that I followed it with this book, which was amazing, actually excellent. I think this book is a book that I would recommend to everyone. Feminists will like this. People who aren't feminists, who don't believe in feminism, should read this as well, because I feel like this is a good basis for looking at the data gap and the gender gap that exists still in society, even though we have the same rights in like many countries. Like, I think there's a lot of people who think that's like, women have had enough now, like, you know, you're taking enough space, but there's still such a gap. And I like that Criado Perez actually mentions, it's very UK and US based, but she mentions like a wide variety of countries and cultures. So I think it's quite large in that scope, and it's really backed up by facts, which I really enjoyed. And sometimes I had to be like, oh, I'll just take a moment to actually read properly these facts so I understand exactly like what's going on. So I thought this was really good. It was less dense than I thought it was going to be, so I think it's actually quite accessible, I found. I learned so much reading this, so it's 100% a recommendation from me. I think it's potentially one of my favorite books of the year so far, and I know we're halfway through November, so it's not that wild of a, you know, claim to make up to now. But yeah, just really good. I'm glad I finally got to where I've had this book for ages, and I was a little bit intimidated by it because it's about data and it felt very scientific, and I was like, oh, you know, but it was written a little bit like a story, so I feel like it wasn't just fast and it wasn't like super scientific, so I think it made a lot of sense. And the whole time it was really funny because they also mentioned parental leave, maternity leave and all of that, and childcare and just care work in general, because there's a lot of the invisible work that women do that's not technically part of the economic view of our society. And the whole time I was waiting for them to mention a study that was done in Quebec, where I'm from, which was about basically the cost of childcare and how much financially that every dollar, like something that you put into childcare, like, or care for children and education for children, like you get that back like multiple times, like later in life, in terms of healthcare, in terms of, you know, people being in employment and stuff like that. And she did mention it like about 3/4 of the book, and she was like, and there was a study in Quebec, and I was like, yay. Which I have to say actually really disappointed me about this book, because early in the book, and to be fair, they don't talk a lot about childcare in this, but early in the book, Leslie Kern mentions that Canada has recently said that they would try to have like a countrywide like childcare initiative plan, whatever. That plan is based on what they did in Quebec in the 90s. So I was kind of waiting for her to refer to that, and she did it, and I was like, oh, it's fine. I mean, you know, lots of people don't know about it. You know, maybe she's not Canadian. She's Canadian. So I was kind of really disappointed, but you know, I'll let it go, because I'm actually happy that it was mentioned in this one, which I actually preferred anyway. So yeah, big recommend for me on this one. And finally, the last book that I finished, which was just over the weekend, was Islands of Abandonment, Life in a Post-Human Landscape by Flyn. This is a book I've had on my list for at least a year. I want to say it won a prize last year, but anyway, this is obviously nonfiction about, well, as the subtitle says, it's life and like what the landscape looks like in a kind of post-human time. So this mentioned, like, I think it's like Chernobyl, so obviously nuclear disasters, natural disasters like floods or volcanoes basically swallowing up islands. So it has like a little bit of everything, which I thought was really cool. It's like man-made and natural and stuff like that. And I thought that it was so lyrical. There's like a longing and a sadness that I thought ran through it. And at the end, she does conclude with talks about obviously the climate crisis and stuff like that I thought was quite bleak. But I feel like, you know, with the titles Islands of Abandonment, with that cover, I feel like you have to expect a little bit of a bleak book. And it was. But also I thought I learned so much, and it was really cool to learn about the different ways that life is kind of reclaiming, or like what happens when these places are kind of left to themselves. It includes a couple of Scottish examples, including like an island in the Great North, let's call it, of Scotland, specifically in the middle of the Atlantic. And that island hasn't had anyone living on it. There's some animals and loads of birds and stuff like that. And she goes spend some time there. So it was really cool to get her experience of it as well, because I think some of it maybe sounded a little bit theoretical, but when you get her own experience, it was really cool. One of my thoughts on this book is that sometimes it went on tangents that I didn't think were totally related, but I think she was trying to give greater context. So let's say she was talking about, I don't know, a volcano eruption, and she would talk about other volcano eruptions, even though they weren't really linked to this one. It's just giving a greater context of the Earth and the planet and other examples of that kind of instances happening. So I think that was cool, but also sometimes like I lost the thread, what was going on. And it is very slow. So I think these are just things to be aware of before getting into this book. And that is obviously a little bit bleak. But I feel like it ends on the somewhat of a hopeful, note. But I'm really, really pleased that I read it, that I listened to it. And it was, I don't know if I mentioned it already, I'm just losing track of myself. But it was narrated by Flyn. And I thought that she obviously gave good voice to like the narration that she wanted for this book. So I would say it's a big recommend for me if that's the kind of stuff that you want to read about, obviously. So just to be aware before diving in. So what else am I reading right now? So I am almost done with The Bookshop That Floated Away by Sarah Henshaw. I have maybe 40-50 pages left, and I cannot wait because literally I did not like this book. I will probably get back to you in my second video, but this book is not very good. Like, I know that bookshop owners are often like grumpy, like in the bookshop, in the like nonfiction bookshop owner books that I've read, but like there's a humor to it. Like Sean Beitel, like I think he does a great job, and he's like just really funny. I didn't think any of this was funny. I'm finishing it because I own this book, and I will promptly give it away when I'm finished, because like currently, okay, I'm in part 2, which is really late in the book, and it's like a 20 or 30 page about the history of the canal boat in the voice of the boat. Like, what is that? Anyway, yeah, and let's not go more into this. I don't want to diss this book more than it needs to, but I really am not liking it. I also am about a third of the way through The Salt Pack by Raynor Winn. I don't know yet how to express my opinion on this book, and I'm only a third of the way through, so I don't want to make an opinion too early. But it is bleak as well at the moment, very bleak. So that's my general thought on it right now. And then is a book that I just randomly found. It's called The Hidden Case of Ewan Forbes, and he was basically a transgender man. He was a baronet at the very famous Pink Castle of Scotland, Criado, and his case was kind of hidden and concealed because his case seems to have been when transgender people weren't allowed to have their birth certificate changed. So apparently it was allowed before then, and then around like the 50s or 60s, like 1950s or 60s, it stopped. So it's really interesting. So it's written by a lawyer who basically came upon the case and was like, wait, what is this? Because common law is based on precedent, this was a precedent, but it was like nowhere to be found because it was kind of hidden away. So it's really interesting, especially with everything that's happening right now in Scotland, well, everywhere, about birth certificate and transgender rights, basically. And it's an audiobook that I found that I'm listening to, and it's narrated by a trans actor. So that's put your money where your mouth is. I love that. And finally, the other one I just want to quickly mention was that Seed to Dust was a book I said that I was going to read. It's very like a nature-based. I started it, and God, I found it so boring, and it was not at all what I expected. So I decided to just DNF it. So I just returned it. And instead, I've decided to replace it with Gathering Moss by Robin Wall Kimmerer. I haven't started it yet, but I just wanted to mention this change of plan, But generally, I think it's going really well, this nonfiction November. I'm really pleased with the books I've been reading, except for the bookshop one. And yeah, I think it's quite a wide variety, although it's very feminist based, but I'm really enjoying it up to now. I am kind of a little bit missing fiction, so I actually just got 2 holds that I've been waiting for like months. So I think I'm going to be listening to those 2 audiobooks that are fiction. Yeah, and I'll probably have it in my last wrap up because I haven't really started them yet, but I think that'll be good. And in terms of NaNoWriMo, well, I'm almost 20,000 words into this novel that I've decided to write. It's a novel I've had in my mind for a couple months, and I've kind of been in my mind like doing the details and the scenes, you know, whatever. And I was like, yeah, I'll wait till November and I'll write it. So once November started, I wrote 15,000 words in the first like 5 days. And then in the last kind of almost 10 days, I've literally wrote only 5,000 words. So it's kind of shameful that I'm actually now behind, even though I was so ahead. Anyway, I'll see how it goes. As always, I feel like when I get to about 20,000 words in a novel, I'm just like, oh, it's garbage. And I get really down on myself and I'm like, oh no, I should start with something else. And obviously I just had another idea for another novel, but you know, I'll never get to anywhere if I keep doing that. So I want to keep going with this novel, but then I started writing a little bit stuff about the other one, you know. Anyway, that's just my wee update on my writing and how that's going. But let me know how your nonfiction November or just your reading month generally is going. You know, what have you read that's been really good lately? And are you doing NaNoWriMo? You know, let me know if that's going well for you, if you're feeling really motivated, if you're a pantser or a plotter, let me know. I was like all about my plot and I was like, oh, it's going so well. And now I'm like, ah. So I guess you never know how that's gonna work out. But anyway, as always, thank you so much for watching and hey, see you back. Bye.